All right, so good evening, hello, and welcome to everyone. This is the future of UX and design. So this is our latest Future of Industry live podcast event. So amazing. Thank you all for joining us. If this is your first time, thank you for finding us. If you've tuned into some of our other programs, welcome back. So I am your host, Brian Antolin, program manager at Langerman. So again, so happy to have all of you here. We're excited to have 5 amazingly talented and accomplished UX designers, engineers, and researchers joining us for our session today to share a little insight and perspective on the future of UX and design. But before we get there, a little bit about us and what we do at Langerman and why we are putting on all of these really incredible events. Langerman is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as today's session. We invite you to check out our website, www.langerman.co, to learn more about our podcasts, classes, and career accelerator programs. Langerman. With that, each member of our panel will briefly introduce themselves. And for this evening, we're going to start with Grace.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Grace. I'm a user researcher at Liberty Mutual currently that's in the Boston area. And I'm leading research for teams that are focused on the mobile app, claims, and also online accounts. And I got into UX because I'm really passionate about just understanding human behavior and understanding why people do the things that they do. So I have a background in anthropology, neuroscience, and also a master's in human factors. On the side, I also run a fashion business with my sister, and it's focused on hats of all things.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Langerman, and I'm a senior UI UX engineer at CarGurus. I also co-organize Ladies at UX Boston, which is a local meetup group that empowers women who work in design and technology. I have a background in graphic design and communications, and I'm a self-taught engineer. So when I discovered UX about 5 years ago, I felt like I finally found my space where I could be kind of a hybrid designer-developer type. And currently I am working on a foundational team at CarGurus, leading an effort to build a design system. I'm really excited to be here tonight and bring the UX engineer perspective to the conversation.
Thanks. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Mitchell Collum. I am currently a senior quantitative UX researcher at Akamai Technologies. For folks who are not aware of Akamai, we are a global content delivery network, cybersecurity, and cloud service company. But a high-level kind of overview of what we do is provide a majority of the internet content that you and I consume day to day. So think of things like visiting websites, streaming Netflix or Hulu, online gaming, live events, etc. That's all provided content through Akamai servers. So at Akamai, I lead the product analytics and experience measurement program, where we've been building out analytics on the user behavior of our applications, automated in-app feedback mechanisms, and targeted user assistance and awareness. Prior to Akamai, I was a senior UX researcher at United Health Group, where I focused on healthcare digital applications. And my academic background is an undergraduate degree in market research and big data analytics from Suffolk University, a graduate certificate of human-computer interaction at the University of Denver, and a graduate certificate in applied statistics from Penn State. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to speak with this great panel on the future of UX and design.
Hi, my name is Tyler King. I'm a designer at IBM. I'm a design researcher by craft, I guess. So I'm the design lead for IBM Z Resiliency. So IBM Z is the business unit within IBM that builds mainframes. So if you think of any time you swipe a credit card or go to an ATM or book a flight or a hotel, not anymore, but in a distant past when you did that, those are transactions, and every single transaction in the world passes through a mainframe somewhere. So your bank, your insurance company, maybe where you bought your shampoo, they all have mainframes. And so I work on Z resiliency. So those are the offerings and products that allow mainframes and mainframe users to achieve as close to zero downtime as possible. So I'm a little bit different from the typical UX designer. I'm not working on like interfaces or anything. I'm focusing primarily on, service design and, how users are interacting with our mainframe technology and how they're interacting with, this big enterprise hardware. I have a marketing background. I got my master's in marketing, and I am currently in the process of joining. It's a new group, but you guys can join too. I'm in the new community called Tech Can Do Better. It's a group of people in tech, so designers and engineers who are, fighting for racial justice and systemic change in the tech industry so that, benefits our Black colleagues. So it's a great organization to get a part of too.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Belinda. I'm a designer at HubSpot, and I'm based in Boston. At HubSpot, I work on different automation tools so that we can help our customers grow their businesses. I'm originally from New York City, and before working at HubSpot, I've worked at different companies like Wayfair and Citi. I actually didn't study or didn't even know what UX was when I was in school or early on in my career. I went to a liberal arts school. So, and then by now I've been very lucky to have had the opportunity to work on different types of UX teams. So right now the UX team I'm on is more structured, but then in the past I've also worked on much smaller UX teams. So being very scrappy and having to navigate almost like the UX team of one has helped me get to where I am today. And I love being in UX. I feel like I found the career and the place that I want to commit to, and I feel like I get to do a lot, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you all so much. I can hear the passion coming through the screen just when all of you are sharing a little bit about your backgrounds. Really incredible. We'll dive right in, and Grace, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, for 2020, the big buzzword is COVID and how it's affected all of us, both personally and professionally. But specifically, when we talk about your work in UX, how has COVID-19 affected your current work and outlook on UX?
Sure. So that's a great question. COVID is really, it's making my role, I think, more important than ever. In terms of my team, we're running more research than ever, even more than 14 studies in this month and the next month. So I'm really leading and managing a lot of different work streams. And I think that research is really critical to meeting user needs, which are often changing during COVID, making sure that you're responsive to them, making sure that you're empathetic to them. A lot of times people may be changing their habits in relation to COVID. In the insurance industry, some people are driving less. We're providing offers like rebates to customers, and research really provides that opportunity to work with people. And I guess there's a lot of different ways to work with research. I think it's also important to work with marketing, to work with different groups to make sure that you're using the right research method to meet their needs. But it's basically a really good time to be a researcher. In terms of how it's affecting the workplace, I don't think a lot of the work that I'm doing is that different. Some of the work does have to be adapted. In-person studies now have to be remote. But the good thing about being a researcher is we've had a lot of those systems in place. It's a matter of shifting methodology. It's a matter of looking at the constraints and realizing the trade-offs. And I think overall, at least at my company, that's going well.
So I have a little, I don't know, it might be a squishier answer to this. But so I have like a two-part answer, but COVID has, impacted my users who are not consumers like you and me. They're like systems programmers that work on the mainframe. And so the way they're working has been impacted because, companies have been impacted by layoffs and furloughs, but even like companies that haven't been impacted by big layoffs, they're still having to change the way that they're doing things. So, you know, my users can't go into their data centers to like do stuff with their capacity or like the wires, or it's harder for them to get on site and actually do things. But because, you know, there's all this craziness going on for my users, it's, you know, it's not their top priority to be working with me and doing research with me and answering all my lovely questions, as much as they might want to bond with me. But so, you know, I've started a couple new projects since COVID has started, not related to COVID, but, you know, just related to my everyday work and the offerings and products I'm working on. And it's been challenging for me to recruit new sponsor users. That's what we call them at IBM. But, you know, when I do get to work with them and when I do get to, you know, finagle the times with them and figure out how we can, you know, start working together, it's been really great. But even, you know, working with the users that I've worked with for, you know, 2-3 years, it's been interesting. We either start the conversation with a laugh and we're like, haha, this is crazy, let's bond over this. Or I've had some users be like really sad and I'm like, oh, and they're like, I don't want to be in my house anymore. So there's like a human connection there. But like Grace said, I think research is super, super important right now, because needs are changing constantly during this like new normal situation. And so, you know, new research and doing research in this and figuring out what the future is going to look like is key. So, you know, from an obvious perspective of like, how could we make things more contactless for everybody? But even for like my customers, since they're handling transactions, what do they do next time? And how can we help them next time if there's a huge spike in customer demand? Like you and everybody else in the world probably went to your grocery store or your local retail store right at the beginning because you had to buy toilet paper. And, you know, that causes a demand on capacity for my users, like compute capacity. So how can we help them in the future? So there's really no limit to what research can help in the future in terms of in the context of COVID.
Definitely makes a lot of sense. And when we're talking about collaborations and trying to connect far-reaching organizations or groups who we normally wouldn't connect with or work with, the research and being backed up by how people are really using and understanding things and then processing and applying it makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much. You know, going from COVID to what understanding people have about UX and the issues people may perceive to have, I think is a really interesting space. And I'll go to Katie on this one first. What's the biggest misconception about UX that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, I'm going to take this from the kind of design engineering perspective. Being someone that does a little bit of both, I kind of see both sides of it. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about UX design specifically is that designers are just pixel pushers and they're just making things look pretty and making perfect prototypes to hand to an engineer. But in reality, I actually think front-end engineers, I think that's the job of a front-end engineer, to be making pixel perfect designs actually in the code. And sometimes I think there's some communication issues there where maybe engineers or product people aren't seeing all the steps that go into the design before the actual prototype is created and handed off. So I thought about this a lot. I feel like there's a few things that we can do to kind of demystify this, and really it all just comes down to communication between people, which is really the answer to most organizational problems. But one thing that we can do is get engineering kind of involved more in the process before the prototypes are designed. Maybe they're involved more with the research or just discussions around the flow of the user journey or the interactions that are going to occur. If they're in those conversations sooner, then we might be able to solve some of those problems that you would encounter when you're actually looking at the prototype from the designer. Another thing I think we can do as designers is trying to document our process and be a little bit more transparent with the decisions that we make in our designs. It's understandable to some degree that an engineer would maybe question some decisions that were made and want to make changes. And if you have some data behind the decisions that you made and some documentation, it allows for a much better conversation to occur between design and engineering.
Thanks. I'm just going to test my audio real quick. Can you hear me okay now? Perfect. So yeah, I would agree with a lot of that, you know, and I'm probably echoing several designers on this one, but I'd say it's the conception that UX is buttons or colors or typography. I think our industry has a unique position where we leverage varying scientific and creative backgrounds to really explore human nature in all its diversity, and then provide a basis for grounding a business strategy or initiative in a larger theory of kind of human and social behavior. I think this helps us develop an understanding of kind of the fundamental and universal elements of any enterprise as a social system, such as values and cultural norms, routines and habits, motivation and communication, and applied in the right way. I believe it helps us facilitate connections, you know, really both internally, so within our organizations, as well as externally, so, you know, with our users, our customers, and our stakeholders. So I like to kind of reframe, you know, introducing UX and research and design as, you know, we really are these facilitators of connections with all of these different moving parts, and I think that's an exciting part of being in this industry.
Yeah, I think that my answer is going to be very much echoing the previous answers, and that's the thing that that stands out to me. It's the misconception that a lot of my work has to do with usability and aesthetics, and this translates into questions about for people getting into UX, asking me about what tools that they should learn, like Figma versus Sketch, or people on my team asking me certain questions about buttons. And I think that probably is where the disconnect is, because most of my work actually isn't in Sketch or in different tools like that. Most of it is actually in different collaboration tools. I spend most of my day on Slack, most of my day on Google Docs and Decks. And the reason for that is because I think that the top two things that I do in my role are communication and collaboration. So not just thinking about what the interaction is or what something would look like, but thinking about what problem are we trying to solve? What's the right problem to solve? Why we should do X instead of Y, what our vision is, what trade-offs we're making, what the impact of our work is, and how we will define and know if we're successful. So I think that's like the biggest thing about how my work actually has to do with collaboration, communication, and influencing, as opposed to being in the different design tools all day.
It's definitely something I really admire about anyone who works in UX. All of you are really, I would dub you as the great communicators, because it's really your job to translate what one group is trying to tell another group, and at the same time keep everyone in line. And that for me is truly amazing, and what is my real interest in what UX and what the work is actually done and how it's applied, because you have to interact with everybody and you have to understand what everyone is saying, and then being able to apply that towards building out solutions. It's just a really incredible process. Speaking of, you know, all of these things that we have to really look out for and watch moving forward, if we were to come up with, as a group, 3 trends to watch in terms of UX design or research, and why these trends are important, what would they be? And Katie, I'm gonna start with you. What is your one trend that we should be watching?
So I'm taking this again from the lens of engineering, and most of what I do in my role is kind of, I don't think a lot about trends like in the sense that like what I see on Dribbble, or like UX design trends out in the world. I think of trends more of like how we're doing our job, how engineers are working and how designers are working. So Linda, you talked about some tooling a little bit before, and I was gonna say, I think tooling is kind of a big trend right now. We have like 3 major players in the game: Figma, Adobe XD, and Sketch. And a few years ago, we really didn't have so many options like this. And they're all kind of competing with each other, and they're all like pushing the boundaries and giving us crazy new features. And I think what's most interesting to me about where this is all going is it's starting to blur the lines a little bit between design and engineering, as these tools are, some of them, outputting front-end code. I don't know how great that code is at this point, but I think it shows that that's a need that some teams want, and it's like the direction that we're moving. I'm really interested to see if we end up, because I think we kind of have to pick one direction, if we're going to end up with these tools like Figma that are design tools that are actually producing really great front-end code that we can just copy and paste into our code bases, or are we going to start seeing these tools actually building design tools for designers to use on top of our code bases? They're actually using the components that already exist, maybe in our design systems or in our code bases as a component library. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see where we end up in a few years.
Yeah, so from the UX research perspective, how Katie was looking at it from the tooling perspective, I'm kind of seeing it from the strategy perspective, and I think that relates to how how research plays a role in UX in organizations. And so for me, it's been really exciting to see UX being leveraged as part of the strategy in businesses. We're slowly starting to see this migration, or at least association, from just financial-based metrics for success to experience-based metrics. And I think companies are really starting to understand the profound impact that UX can make to really any product, service, or industry. And we're getting better at effectively measuring it and also associating it to that business value. So you'll see many of these initiatives have some mix of UX research and data science in terms of experimentation platforms. And so for me, it's really exciting to understand what businesses intend to measure, how they intend to measure those things, and then also associating changes in a design or a product or a workflow, and actually understanding how those impact not only the users or customers' experience, but also the kind of overall success of the business as a whole.
Hi. So in terms of the trends that I'm seeing, I think that at least for user research, there's got to be a lot more research done on the omnichannel experience. And by that, I mean different experiences, both in person and on different devices. I think that it's really important for ease of use, for working between different time periods, for customers who are now going digitally, going online, whereas before they went in store. I think that's really important, and it's important as well in my company, just because people who used to go to their agents' insurance offices are now doing things themselves online. People are moving from phone to desktop to mobile. So I think that's going to be increasingly important, especially given COVID. I think it's a little bit what you had mentioned, Tyler. I think user research provides a great opportunity to make this first experience for people who are going online a great experience.
I think that's a really great way to bridge between the different directions we have to go in, talking about the tooling and the strategy, and then where we go from there, over to the challenges in general that people working in UX are going to face. And Tyler, we'd love to go to you first. We had to start another top 3 list. What is the top challenge that you think UX professionals will have to face over the next 3 to 5 years?
So another squishy answer, but that's fine. mine is less around like technical challenges and like challenges in the field, but I think my answer is more of like a cultural challenge. So, you know, a lot of, you know, across the industry, I'm seeing a lot of homegrown design studios pop up in big corporations. Like even like IBM Design was homegrown-ish, and has like grown really swiftly. And that's great. And like even, you know, in my own design studio in Poughkeepsie, New York, like we have a really great culture and we're building a great community. But it's really easy to, you know, get comfortable and not push for changes in the way your company works. So, you know, for me, like when I first started, design was really new, and IBM, especially in IBM Z, they were like, what do we do with designers? And, you know, we had to teach people how to work with designers and how to leverage designers in the best way possible. And, you know, they've made changes. Instead of us like jumping on a moving train to be like, wait, pull us in, we got to be part of the product stuff. They're actually stopping the train now, which is great, but we still have a lot of work to do. And we have work to do to like get on the train at the first station instead of getting on the train after it's left a couple stations down. So not getting complacent, not getting comfortable and be like, oh, they made some changes, that's fine. Keep fighting to make your organization the best place for design, a really great place for design to flourish. So I think that's a challenge that we could see coming up.
Awesome. I feel like some of my answers are going to overlap with that as well. I think that one big challenge is, well, first of all, how UX is getting a seat at the table. Many companies are understanding the value of UX and designers and researchers, et cetera, people on the UX team. But not everybody quite knows what to expect from folks in UX. So that makes it challenging when we're trying to be included in certain conversations that people might not always think of UX folks being involved in. So even things like the product life cycle, when people are talking about including UX early in the process, that actually might be in the middle of the process or end of the process. So how they define early might be different from how we define early. And so I think it's really important for us to keep evaluating and keep sharing feedback about how we want to be involved and share expectations for when to best engage with us. And this is a challenge, but it's also really exciting because it's an opportunity for us to help define what that could look like. Some other challenges that I can think of are, for me personally, collaborating with people remotely. So I'm lucky that I've been in companies that have been used to some level of remote work. So people are okay with collaborating, but then with workshops, even when you're collaborating cross-functionally in person, it's a little bit easier to handle tricky situations, like when people aren't comfortable drawing different ideas on Post-its and stuff. You can at least be there in person to guide them. But just recently in a workshop, I had to figure out, well, how does this translate into something that's remote? Because there are always these little situations that you might not always think through, even if we have done it before. So I feel like there's a lot that we take for granted that are in person that we're trying to adapt in how we brainstorm and collaborate with others. And I think the last challenge is something that is going to be an ongoing thing for UX. So customers and users having higher and higher expectations all the time, because that's a good thing, and it's also good for our profession and what we're supposed to do overall. But the bar is constantly being raised, and the expectations are always getting higher, and there's so much we can do there.
I hesitate a little bit to call this a challenge because it's a thing that has to happen. But accessibility is kind of a big thing happening right now. I think we're in the middle of like a culture shift where it's part of the product process now to make sure our products, our web apps, our apps are accessible for a wider range of abilities. It is challenging in some ways. There are some technical limitations there, and there's a lot of knowledge that needs to kind of percolate, especially in engineering. It's one of those things that at least it used to be seen as like, I don't know what's accessible. I don't know how to make something accessible. That is somebody else's job. And now I think we're starting to shift more onto it's everybody's job to make sure what we're designing or what we're engineering is accessible. So I think we're going to see more of a push. There's definitely been, we're moving in the right direction from the past like 5 years or so. I think in the next few years, we'll see more of a push, and we'll kind of push the boundaries there to make things even more accessible than we can ever imagine that they are.
I love that you brought up accessibility, Katie, because you're right. That is probably one of the, if we were to come up with another buzzword aside from COVID and pandemic, it would be accessibility. And how do we provide greater opportunities and make them equal access for everybody? So definitely something that we should be watching for and seeing what that net effect will be moving forward. We have quite a few entry-level folks who are looking to either jump into UX or work in another part of tech, who want to jump into UX, or who are just starting out their careers who are in college. And I think it would be a really great idea to look at how do all of you as professionals really prepare and refine your craft so that you can provide that really unique and necessary perspective in your work. And Tyler, we'll start with you. What are the type of resources or tools or groups that you lean on or use in order to really sharpen your skills?
I have 3, and I will do the elevator pitch for each. But the first really big one is storytelling. It's like fairly intangible, but it's super, super important, especially as a researcher, because, telling a story through the lens of my user lets me convey potentially really complex scenarios and complex concepts in a way that's easy to understand, it's easy to consume, and it just makes my research insights stronger, and it helps me like make my team build empathy. There's also, talking to engineers. I think it's a very underrated skill, but I think Belinda was talking about it maybe. And, being able to not just talk to your fellow designers, but be able to talk to the people that are literally making the magic happen. They are building your dreams and making your dreams come true. Being able to talk to them, be their friends, and communicate with them is a really important skill. And the last thing is design workshop facilitation. So, can you facilitate a design thinking workshop? If I was like 100% stuck on my product work forever, I would lose my mind. So being able to like be a good facilitator and step out of my product work for a couple of days to facilitate a workshop for a couple of people, for a team, inside of IBM or outside of IBM. It's a great way for me to like get my mind off my work and not get stuck in the monotony, but also it helps me think creatively, think differently, and it helps me build my network inside of IBM, outside of IBM. And the connections I've made through workshops have been really, really helpful for getting my job done and for building my career. So those are the skills I recommend.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tyler's answer. I think, communication and taking that little bit of extra investment in the stakeholders that you work with really goes a long way. And I found that to be especially true with working with engineering teams. If there are things that I can do, to show them that I'm invested in the work that they're doing, it really, it gets us on the same page, and it really helps that working relationship. Outside of the day-to-day work, I think the UX industry as a whole does a really good job presenting great ideas, case studies, whether it's at events or workshops or papers or books or some forms of blog. And I really learned so much from my colleagues in the industries and the diverse perspectives that we have. So I think as a researcher, one of the best things that you can do is read research. It helps me come up with new ideas, new metrics, methodologies. And so, some of my personal favorites on the UX side are, some of the work done by Jim Lewis and Jeff Soro at Measuring You when it comes to UX and measurement, and also taking a peek at some of the different articles coming from Nielsen Norman Group, the Journal of Usability Studies, Kai papers, but I mean, it's such an intelligent group of people that work in this industry. There's so much good content out there that you can leverage for your day-to-day work. I really think it's valuable to just kind of go out and look.
Well, I totally agree with everything Tyler and Mitch mentioned. I'm gonna throw a crazy one out there, but it's improv comedy. So I took a course in it, or I took a workshop actually in improv research a couple years ago at a UX conference, and it was a bit crazy for me. I'm a shy person. I don't always say what's on my mind, but it's a great way to learn how to become comfortable speaking, making your presence known, and really working with other people to facilitate trust. So that was a great experience. And even after that, I learned a few basics on how to tie UX to improv. After that, I took a course in improv, and I wouldn't say I'm the best comedian or improv actor, but it's just a great way to move yourself outside your comfort zone, to experience some struggle, to experience some failure, but also to practice just going with it. Because as a user researcher, things are not going to always go right when you moderate a session or meet a different person who you haven't worked with before. So I think improv really teaches you some of those skills that you need to be a successful person and to be flexible.
Improv is such an underrated skill, and it's so necessary, especially when you're working at that intersection of so many different voices and you don't know how to really bridge that gap sometimes. Being able to have that ability to quickly pivot and change direction, and also bring in just a dose of fresh air to a conversation. Improv really brings that. So that's a really great perspective. And also talking about the storytelling from earlier, being able to convey what those other stakeholders are really thinking and feeling, and conveying it in a way that also respects everyone and no one really steps on each other's toes is so important. I think doubling down on this topic of how do you prepare for UX and what kind of resources do all of you really lean on? Uh, I think a reality that a lot of people are facing, and I think we can all agree, is that the job market isn't that great, and we have so many people who are actively looking for positions, and some who haven't done this before, and some who haven't done this in decades. So if we were to press a reset button and try to give advice to people who are actively applying and maybe going for interviews for UX jobs, what would be that one or two pieces of advice that you'd have to give them to prepare for these positions? And Mitch, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's challenging, right? Honestly, I think one of the best things you can do, and this may not be really UX specific even, is reach out to folks in the industry. I find any time that I reach out to connect with someone, they're almost always willing to chat. And those are folks even at the VP level at companies. I think that can really, get you a good grounding in understanding what companies are doing, what they're looking for in terms of skill and culture, some of the language that they use. But you can really take a lot from meeting with those folks that are currently doing this in different industries and in different companies. And roll some of that into your resume and into your communication and interviews with some of these organizations.
I would say to keep learning, keep working on different projects if you can. You have the time. Keep attending events like these. Books, talking to people is definitely a good one. Evaluating different apps, websites, etc., and keep exploring to see what interests you. I spent a good amount of time in my career convincing people that I was a UX designer, even when I had the title, because I didn't have a design background. And I spent a lot of my career also trying to erase my previous quote unquote irrelevant experience. I felt like that was holding me back from becoming a UX designer and being seen as a UX designer at my company and from my peers. And I it was only more and more recently that, and with a change of the work environment that I was in, that I felt like, okay, wow, like that is my superpower, like my different background, my different experience, like I'm in a place where people value that. And I feel like as the industry as a whole, UX is so much more diverse now and so much more welcoming of different perspectives because it's so multidisciplinary. And what I once thought was irrelevant or not helpful for my background and for my work was actually what I should lean into more. And that's something that I feel like is everyone's superpower, and figuring out your story and leaning on your backgrounds and what you're already doing and how that translates into different jobs that you're interested in is really powerful. So that's something those are a couple of things I would say. Continue to keep learning. You've got this, staying motivated and feeling like you're empowered, and the work that you bring to the table, I mean, the perspective that you're bringing to your work is going to be valued.
Yep, I agree totally with everything that you've mentioned. I was going to say some of the same things, but generally I'd echo that. I think your story is really what makes you personal. It's really where you have to be your own best advocate and show people your passion, create a relevant story as to why you're applying to that job. So you really have to show, if you're looking for a job, that you understand the company, and often if people don't have that much experience in industry, that's where you have to put yourself out there more and do some of that background research. And I also think that it's important to build those skills to show that you can be a good researcher or designer. For me in the research process, I think one important thing that you can do is just to take any difficult process, break it apart and explain it to someone who doesn't understand it, in order to really show and demonstrate that you can make things digestible, that you can really show your thought and methodology well. I think that's really important. Sorry.
Definitely. And being able to put all these pieces together is really crucial. And no matter what position you're going after or what direction you're taking it in, whether it's a designer role or a researcher role, engineering role, or something else, it's really important to really dot your I's, cross your T's, and make sure that you can convey your story properly. And I think this also goes along really well with some of our questions from the audience, which we're getting a lot of really great ones. But we'll start with Lauren's because it goes pretty much hand in hand with what we're talking about right now. Do you have any advice for landing your first UX or product design job? So Tyler, I think you had a good answer.
Yeah, so I would say a lot of it's in your portfolio. I do portfolio reviews for IBM design hiring, and I'll tell you what, like, I look for as a portfolio reviewer. I look for you to, one, I want your work to be nice, whatever, blah. But you could have the best work in the world, and if you don't explain your process, you don't tell me how you did it, I'm gonna throw your portfolio out so fast because I don't know anything about you. I don't know that you can duplicate that at IBM or wherever you're going. I don't know if you're going to work well on my team. So when you're putting together your portfolio, use storytelling, like I said, and, explain your design process. Design's a process. It's sometimes messy. Show me the mess. Take pictures of your Post-it notes on your wall. Show me the sketches. Show me weird cell phone pictures of you and your team, going on an ice cream adventure. But just show me the process and don't feel awkward. Don't be nervous about oh my God, am I writing too much? Is Tyler going to be annoyed reading this? Let me worry about that. I'd rather have too much information than not enough. So paint your story. Let me know who you are as a designer in your portfolio.
So everyone, you heard that first. Too much information is always better.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Moving on to Jesse's question. I think this is the really good one to tackle. What is something that makes you excited to talk about with fellow UX researchers? So we'll kind of extend that a little bit. We'll have one perspective from a researcher and one perspective from a designer. Mitch, you want to take the researcher angle?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. This is an interesting one. I think there are a lot of things that you can get excited talking about when it comes to UX research. I think, for me personally, one of the aspects is the human aspect, right? We're doing research on how people behave, how they behave with, different interactions with digital devices, omni-channel experiences, et cetera. I think it's always very interesting to think about different use cases, especially when we see new technologies, become more ubiquitous. So I find myself constantly reaching out to colleagues in the research field when we see new technologies coming out, thinking about, oh, what are some of the use cases that people might have for this? What are people doing with this? One that came up recently was Spotify's new kind of group listening in beta. So sometimes, we'll see things like that and we'll start to just kind of noodle on like, what are the different ways people intend to kind of use this feature, and what was, some of the things that incentivized these different companies to build these technologies. So I find that to be really interesting and conversational with the other UX researchers.
From the engineering perspective, this is what makes me a hybrid, is that I really appreciate the design perspective and the research, and I find it very interesting, but I love talking about random technical things about front-end development, and it is so much fun. I love talking about CSS and design systems and component libraries with other engineers. Today we had an interview with somebody, and the interview was just looking at the DOM and talking about the different parts of the DOM and talking about accessibility. And it's so refreshing to talk to other people who understand that and are on that level. And it's very nerdy, but I love it.
All right, and I think from a design perspective, anyone want to jump in? Perhaps Belinda, you want to jump in on the design perspective?
Sure. I would say something that I love talking to fellow designers about. Generally, the customer problems, even though that seems like a very obvious answer, but it is something that I get to think about and talk to on a regular basis, because the problems are always changing, or maybe it's the same problem but in a different way, or maybe it just keeps growing if we don't solve it. So I would say that that's what gets me excited every day to talk to my teammates about.
Great. And moving forward, Olga's question, really interesting. What do you do to be more influential as a designer and researcher? And it looks like Tyler has a good answer for this.
So, I'm a young lady in tech and I'm a researcher. And so I think that design researchers especially are in like a really strong position to, you said like grow your influence, I think, right? I think design researchers are definitely in like a really strong position to grow their influence and kind of work, across discipline, which is great. And so the way I do that is I get myself a seat at the table. I partner with an engineer, I partner with my, product managers, we call them offering managers, and I talk. I don't like wait necessarily for, as you can tell, for someone to be like, Tyler, like, share your insight. I'm just like, I talk to the users, I know them the best, and it's my job to advocate for them. And so I make myself have a seat at the table and I share what I know about the users, and I contribute really valuable knowledge to whatever conversation I'm in with, my team. And that really helps me have influence. So.
Olga, hi Olga. So Olga is one of the co-organizers of Ladies at UX Boston with me. So I would say one of the things you can do is organize a meetup group that automatically gets your name out there, and it allows you to interact with a lot of different people, a lot of different skill sets in the industry. And second to that, which is another thing that Olga knows very well, getting into mentorship. If you can I think that can kind of take your career to the next level, is taking on a mentee, showing them the ropes. There's a really great program called Hexagon, and I think it's just in the United States, but we have a chapter in Boston, and I know there's a few chapters across the country, and they kind of help you, they pair you up with a mentee, and you can start your mentorship journey there.
Great. And next question we have is from Alex. I think Grace wants to answer this one. If you were starting to explore a UX career today, where would you start? Forums and conferences, certifications, portfolio? Grace, definitely sounds like you had a good answer for this one.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I think I'm a little bit across the board. I've done a little bit of everything. I didn't initially know what UX was, but I was studying some of it. I studied anthropology in high school in like random classes that I would take. So I've done field work even like from age 16. So I'm a little bit of a strange person. But in terms of if I was starting a UX career today, I think I'd want to take some classes in college if possible. Probably take some classes in design or take some classes in research. I think psychology is a really good background for a lot of user research. And sorry, can you still hear me? Okay, my screen's frozen right now, so okay. And me personally, I did do a master's degree, and I think that was really valuable for at least my career. It taught me how to work with different groups. I got to work that everyone has a different journey. If you do have the resources to get an education in that, I would really pursue that. I think it's a little bit different for research versus design. I think design might be a little bit more experiential. It might be a little bit more portfolio based. But in terms of research, it's all about getting in those interviews, getting in a lot of that experience in the lab and talking to people. And one way of doing that is to get some education in it through taking courses.
I would say that it depends on where you are at your career, your time, resources. So really, there's no one answer that's going to work for everyone. I would say that different certification programs, boot camps, a lot of people have gone to them and done them, but there isn't one right answer because you really have to figure out what motivates you and what's best for you. So for example, some people, they need that structured environment and they want to be around different students and peers so that they feel motivated and feel like they're learning from others. But that's not always the case for other people. Other people might want to be doing, they might want to read books independently or work on different projects, not in a structured environment. So I would say that all these different ways are the best way as long as they work for you. And I didn't have a degree in this, and that was perfectly okay too, because I loved being able to read and talk to people, and that was the way that worked for me to feel motivated and feel like I was going to be learning, and getting to talk to people in the industry was really helpful for me as well.
I love the point that you both made, Belinda and Grace, on it really starts with you, and you have to understand how you learn best, and then from there determine what are the resources that are available to you, and then how that applies to getting into a UX role. So it is a process, but it all comes back to starting with you. And Charo has a really unique question about do you need a traditional graphic digital design background in order to become a UX designer? And I think, Katie, you had some insights on this one.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you need it. I think it will help you if you do have some visual design background. I think this is kind of starting to shift though, like maybe a few years ago, and also it totally depends on the role that you have. There are some UX designers or some product designers that are much more strong in the visuals than others. Some of them are a little bit weaker in visuals, but they are great at discovering the user interactions that they need, or doing research, or making decisions about the product. So it's really going to depend on the kind of role that you go into and the expectations of the company. If it's a smaller startup, they might expect a little bit more of you and expect you to kind of be able to handle all of the visual work. But that said, I do think this is starting to shift, like we kind of talked about earlier with the new tooling that we have. If you're entering a company that has a design system already, you're kind of, there's a good chance you're going to be building your products off of like a sticker sheet. So you might be kind of just moving the pieces around and making more decisions about the product overall and the usability and the interactions versus the actual visual design.
Great answer, and also a really great way to leave things off with our event tonight. And, you know, this has been a really, really eye-opening and incredible session. I can't thank the five of you enough. And, you know, if we were to come up with just a recap of everything, one, it starts with you. Two, in order to be able to be in the UX field, no matter which angle you're in, you have to be able to communicate and be able to understand and translate what people are saying. That's really the crux of it. And then three, being able to take that a step further, work on a team, and also being an advocate for each of your stakeholders in that process. I think that's a really, really important lesson that we don't often hear. When it comes to UX, we always hear about the creative part. We always hear about the structural part. We hear about the technical issues, but it all comes back to UX is centered on people. And I think the more we can really keep that in mind first, and then everything else kind of follows, the better off we'll be, the better off you'll be if you're pursuing a career in UX. So again, can't thank all of you enough for joining. Can't thank all of our audience for being here. Before we let you go, just want to show one thing. So we do have a couple events coming up on Line Run. So this was a really great one on UX. If we were to scroll down, the next one we have specifically focusing on industry is machine learning on September 8th. And we already have some really great speakers from Amazon and Google already confirmed. So that's cool. I still have no idea how people agree to do this, but I'm thankful they do. Next week, smart cities. We're talking everything infrastructure and cities and how do we rebuild post-COVID. So that's next week on September 18th, August 18th, fast forwarding in my head. And then we go to Silicon Valley next month and talking about everything that's going on out in the Valley and all the really interesting innovations we should look out for. So again, thank you all for being here and participating. Really incredible questions. I think that's the best set of questions we've had in any session. I've done 25 in the past 10 weeks. So kudos to our audience. Thank you all thank you so much to our experts for being here. And for those of you who joined in late, we will be sending out a recording pending Zoom. Hopefully Zoom cooperates with us. And also we will send a follow-up email with everyone's LinkedIn so you can connect. So you can expect that at the end of the week. So with that, have a good evening and thank you all.
Thank you.